Hi, I'm Geoffrey Brown. I am an account rep for Brighton Home Health and Hospice. I've been in the senior services industry since 2012, so about 6 years. I've been a housing coordinator, customer relations coordinator. Now I work here all around the Twin Cities, marketing for Brighton Home Health and Hospice. But I've been teaching this class for a couple of years now, and it really is just like a primer on senior housing, because it's a big topic. So we're kind of going to skim the surface. 9 years ago, which is the last time they did tracked everyone, 4% of all seniors in Minnesota were living in a senior housing facility, meaning not in their home, not in their house or their apartment that they lived in. 8% lived in assisted living facilities. So 4% in something like skilled nursing, 8% in assisted living, and the rest, 88%, still lived in their homes. So that might seem like, well, what's the point of talking about senior housing if so few people, only 12% of the population, access it? Well, even if you're still living in your home, a condo, a house, an apartment, you're most likely going to intersect at some point with one of these acronyms, which is why I'm teaching this class. It's why I call it the ABCs, because there are so many. A TCU is a transitional care unit. An ADL is an activity of daily life. So these are all acronyms that you will run up against as you navigate healthcare and housing for seniors. Okay? So we're going to cover all of these acronyms as we go through today. But there's a bunch of them, and there's too many for any one person to just know without having dealt with them before. So that's why this class. Licensed personnel versus unlicensed personnel. Licensed personnel, things like RNs, that's a registered nurse, an LPN, licensed practical nurse, those types of things. Those are the folks that you'll see in a hospital. Hospitals have licensed personnel, down to folks like orderlies who aren't licensed personnel. I mean, they have a very specific skill set, but you don't have to be licensed to become an orderly or a custodian or something like that. However, in the senior services industry, you also have unlicensed personnel who do a lot of the same things that licensed personnel do. So unlicensed personnel, they still have initials after their titles, and you'll see that a lot. But these folks are also in home health care, assisted livings, and skilled nursing facilities. You'll still have CNAs, certified nurse assistants, or you might have a home health aide. That's technically not a licensed personnel. Now, CNAs, the reason they have an asterisk by theirs, they do go through extra training. So there's a certificate that you can get to be a CNA, but it's technically not licensed like an RN or like an LPN. Those are things to look at, and the reason I put these slides in, those are things to look for when you're looking at facilities. So that's something to look at when you're talking to facilities about whether or not you're going to move there or whether or not you're going to have a loved one move there, is whether or not they use licensed personnel or not. So most facilities will have a combination of licensed personnel and unlicensed personnel. And the unlicensed personnel is always under the direction of the licensed personnel. So like my company, Brighton, we have a home health section, which means we do skilled nursing in people's homes. So we have RN case managers, that's a registered nurse, registered with the state, who guides a team of LPNs and CNAs. So licensed practical nurse and CNAs, certified nurse assistants. So they're under the direction of an RN who puts together a care plan and decides about their training and about the tasks that they're going to fulfill for the clients. So that's kind of how the hierarchy works. Unlicensed personnel will always be under the direction of licensed personnel at a reputable facility. So short-term care versus long-term care. Short-term care is exactly what it sounds like. And it can take place at the same location as long-term care. Or it can happen in your home, too. Here's the scenario. You fall down, you break your arm, and you go to the hospital, and they either do surgery or they set your arm or do whatever, and you're admitted to the hospital. And then when it's time for you to discharge from the hospital, a social worker, it's another one of those acronyms, SW is a social worker, will come and talk to you and say, what is your plan for when you go home? And you say, oh, I'm just going to go home, it's no big deal, I just have my arm in a sling, I'll be fine. And then he or she will ask you, do you have stairs at your house? Do you know, how are you going to manage cooking for yourself? How are you going to manage changing any kind of wound dressing that you might have? And that's when you have to tell them your plan. And if you have someone living with you who can help you with all of those activities of daily life, that's another one of the acronyms, ADL, that we talked about. When you talk to that social worker, they'll ask you how you're going to manage, and then you have to explain to them how you're going to manage. And if there's not a good plan for you, if it doesn't seem like it's going to be safe, they're going to recommend that you go somewhere where you'll be safe. And one of those places is a transitional care unit. If you have rehab after an arm break or a hip replacement or a knee replacement or a shoulder replacement, I'm thinking about my dad and all the things he had done in the last 3 years. I told him he has to join a new tennis league because now he's bionic on one side. He has a new shoulder and a new knee. So, but you have to go through rehab after a surgery like that, and the place that might take place is at a transitional care unit, which is usually in a skilled nursing facility. Some of them stand alone, but that's not real common. Usually they're in a skilled nursing facility, and it's usually one wing off by itself. And you go there, and usually for about 5 to 15 days, you'd stay in a transitional care unit, do intensive rehab until you get the function back, or at least enough function that you can go home and safely manage your own activities of daily life safely. That's the whole point of a transitional care unit, or a TCU. Respite care also happens usually in a facility. Some home health agencies will do respite care in the home. My experience is most of the respite care that I have been a party to and helping people to navigate has happened within a facility, an assisted living facility or a skilled nursing facility. So say you're a caregiver for a family member at home. So you're the one who's managing their meals and managing their medication compliance and wound dressing and their toileting needs and things like that. So if you're helping manage all those things for somebody in your home, well, everybody needs a break sometimes, or a respite. So we have something called respite care. So you can arrange for the person that you're in charge of to go stay at an assisted living facility or a skilled nursing facility for a brief amount of time so that you can get a break. I've seen it used quite often when somebody has like an out-of-town wedding or something like that. It's something that you can't miss. So your daughter's getting married in Utah and you live here in Minnesota, but you take care of somebody 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're that person's caregiver. Well, somebody needs to look after that person while you go to Utah for your daughter's wedding, so you can arrange for them to stay at a skilled nursing facility or an assisted living, or you could arrange for a home health agency to come to your home or to that person's home where you're the caregiver and do all those things that you would do for them while you're away. And there are agencies that do that in-home, and there are agencies that, or you can do it at a facility. Home health care agencies would be the ones who would come to your home. Long-term care, lots of different names. Long-term care can happen in a variety of settings. There are a bunch of different kinds of buildings. There are a bunch of different kinds of agencies that all do home health care, or that all do long-term care. So you might have something called independent living or a co-op, senior housing, senior apartments. Would also be, I wouldn't necessarily call that care, but that's another term for an independent living facility. Assisted living, skilled nursing facility, a CCRC, which is a continuing care retirement community. Retirement community, nursing home.
What's congregate care?
Congregate care. That is more like a residential facility where it's more in the co-op style, where multiple people, it's literally just another name for a residential care facility. So, which is another word, residential care facility. Now, within the industry, we kind of delineate those. Independent living is going to be a big apartment building, essentially, or sometimes it's a group of townhomes or a group of small cottages. That would be an independent living type of situation. Assisted living, essentially what an assisted living is it's an apartment building that has a home care agency inside. That's really all assisted living is. Residential care is usually one house. It's usually a house that's purchased by an agency like Geneva Homes or Gianna, and they purchase a house and then they remodel it to make it accessible and safe for multiple people to live there. Generally, people with advanced conditions, things like ALS or Parkinson's, oftentimes are in that type of a setting, in a residential setting.
So that would be in like a neighborhood?
Like a neighborhood, yeah.
So it could be a house just across the street?
Yeah. So you could have one, and you might not even know it. Generally, you'll figure it out because the driveway will have a van
Or a ramp.
or ramps are put on the front of houses and things like that. So if you're in your neighborhood and you see somebody comes in and completely remodels the house, puts a ramp on the front of it, might be turning into a residential care facility or congregate care. Independent living is an apartment building. And generally, they'll have age limits on it, so like a 55 plus. You'll see that on the sign generally, 55 plus. So that just means that nobody under 55 can live in that apartment building or in that little community. And that's all it is. There's no services generally in an independent living. Now, if it's an independent living that's attached to an assisted living, that's attached to a skilled nursing, and that's pretty popular nowadays, that's happening a lot more. You'll see them they'll come out and clear cut a nice wooded area, and they'll build a big building, and it looks like 3 different apartment buildings all kind of smushed together. One of them's independent living, which means you can live there just in your apartment, no services. And then if you start to need services, some of them make you move to the assisted living. And then if you need more services than you can get in assisted living, then they'll make you move again into the skilled nursing side. That's a pretty common way that they're organized. Some of them, and this is getting more popular now, have independent living and assisted living. And if you move into independent living, sometimes they'll just let you stay there and get services from their assisted living agency in your apartment and stay there. And that's what we call age in place, which is a very popular phrase nowadays in the senior housing industry. Age in place basically means you live in your apartment forever, essentially, and you just stay there without having to move to a higher level of care. That's independent living. Nice apartment, no services. Assisted living, essentially the same thing, only with services. It's just there's a home care agency in that assisted living that will take care of services for you. So what kind of services can you expect in assisted living? Meals, med management, wound care oftentimes. And the thing about assisted living now in 2018 is it is a lot more robust than it used to be. It used to pretty much just be meals. Like that's what you would expect in assisted living. Now they're doing pretty much skilled nursing care in assisted living at this point. And the state realized that a couple of years ago and completely changed the regulation. I often tell people if you're going to move into senior housing, do it in Minnesota. It's more highly regulated here. We're kind of the testing place, I would say, for the rest of the country on how it gets done. Minnesota is so highly regulated, which, there's debates on that, but one of the things it says to me is if I know that if somebody I love is moving into a senior housing situation in Minnesota, I know that there are a lot of laws to protect them here, and that's very important. So, assisted living, like independent living, only with some services. Skilled nursing, which is the level up from assisted living. Skilled nursing is what we used to call a nursing home back And you'll see, you'll have more instances of hospital beds and shared rooms. The real difference between assisted living and skilled nursing is environmental. Assisted living is an apartment. It's a private apartment with a locked door where you can tell somebody to go away. So it's less prescriptive than skilled nursing. In skilled nursing, things are more prescriptive. It's more of a medical type setting. I would say that's accurate. So you'll notice more, it's more hospital-like. There will be shared rooms more often. And it's called a room instead of an apartment. Because in assisted living, it's an apartment. You'll usually have some form of a kitchen or a kitchenette. You'll have your own private bathroom, and you'll have your own private shower, and you'll have your own private living space. Studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms. I've seen 3 bedrooms. Seriously big, posh assisted living apartments. Skilled nursing, it's going to be smaller. There's most likely, if you're in a private room, obviously you'll have a private bath or a private bathroom. Probably not a private shower. Usually in skilled nursing, there's what they call a spa room or on a hallway, and everybody on that hallway uses that spa room because they're all getting assistance with their bathing. Memory care is really just a description of services. It's not really a description of a place, because memory care can be done in an assisted living environment or a skilled nursing environment. And oftentimes it's kind of a mix of the two. So memory care essentially means it's a locked unit. It just means that there is restricted access to outside. That's really what memory care is. And if you ask Dr. Brosey, who's the leading doctor in the industry, he will tell you that memory care is not even the right name for it. It's really impulse control. Because folks who are living in memory care, it's usually folks who have some form of dementia, Alzheimer's or Parkinson's related or vascular dementia. Those are the 3 most common, I would say. And it's really not about their memory, except that they'll forget to take their meds or they'll forget what day it is. And that doesn't really, forgetting what day it is really doesn't make you unsafe, but forgetting to take your medication can totally make you unsafe, and that's why somebody might live in memory care. If really that's the only issue someone's having, they would probably be having their memory care in an assisted living environment if all they really needed was somebody managing their meds. Now, if they are what we call a wander risk, if they are someone who is apt to wander, and living in Minnesota, this is extremely important. If this is somebody who would not remember to put on multiple layers in January and walk outside, if somebody starts walking outside and they're just in their pajamas, that means that they are not making sound decisions about their own safety. So that's why a family or some social workers might deem memory care to be appropriate. Oftentimes, it's not necessarily the family's decision, because somebody might be living in assisted living and doing fine in assisted living for a while, but if their dementia progresses to the point where they're no longer safe and they're not making sound decisions about their own safety, someone at that assisted living facility might say, and it's never an easy conversation for anybody on either side of the table, they might say, I think it's time to start considering memory care. And I would say you judge memory care just like you would your assisted living, just like you would your independent living or your skilled nursing. You judge it the same way. You look at the staff and you say, are these folks people that I can feel good about caring for my loved one or the person I'm concerned about? Structured activities. So that's something, activities is something that happens in all of these types of facilities. Independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, memory care, all of them have activity staff. It's called therapeutic recreation on the skilled nursing side. It's just called activities on the assisted living side. And generally it's things like you would do here at the community center. So they have chair yoga, they have dances, they have musicians who come in and entertain, things like that. So, but that's something you'll see in all senior housing facilities, is some form of activities. Bingo is a big deal, bridge is a big deal. Field trips, go out to the movies quite a bit on a bus, usually. So it's the more fun aspect of senior housing is activities. It's actually how I got into senior housing. I was dragooned by, she's my wife now, she was my girlfriend at the time, and she asked me if I wanted to go to a concert. She was like, "You want to go to a concert on Saturday?" And I said, "Sure." She goes, "Good, you can be my wheelchair man." I said, "What?" And she was working for activities at a facility around the corner from here, actually. And so I went, and I was her. I pushed wheelchairs and got to enjoy a free concert. It was nice. And then I found out that I was good at talking to seniors about their housing needs, and so I got into the industry. That's how that worked. Let's see, pay sources. How are you going to pay for living in senior housing? Because it's not inexpensive. It's just expensive. It is. Way more expensive than living in your own townhome or your own apartment or your own house. And that's the thing that gets me too, is folks live for 50, 60 years in their house, and that's a method of security. That's a way of feeling secure, and then all of a sudden it seems like it's not safe to live there anymore, and you have to make a choice about some senior housing. It's going to be different. You have to downsize, like you were talking about, Wanda, and so those are hard decisions to make. But my advice to folks, and I can say this now because I work for an agency that goes into people's homes: stay home as long as possible. That is the way to make sure your assets will last as long as possible, because as soon as you move into senior housing, your assets are going to start to dwindle, and it happens faster than you think it will. The average, just on average from the places I've worked and the folks that I've worked with, the average that you're going to pay to live in assisted living, about 30, this is low, about conservative estimate, $3,500 a month. And that's with not a lot of services. That's just basically apartment. Yeah. Yeah, maybe a couple of times, maybe a wake up, what we call a jump start, and then a tuck in at night, that kind of a thing. And maybe somebody looking out for your meds. That actually gets even more expensive.
Is this ever going to change with the growing, aging population?
Yes, it has to. I will say the way it's paid for now, in assisted living, you rent your apartment, you purchase your services, mostly a la carte. They'll have packages and things put together for folks, but for the most part, you rent your apartment and you say, I need somebody to manage my meds. I'm going to have 3 meals a day. I need somebody to come in and help me get dressed in the morning, and I need somebody to make sure I'm in my pajamas at night. And so those are each services that you're going to purchase, and you're going to see those on a bill every month. And that's going to be running around $3,500 to $4,000 a month, just that. And that's kind of bare minimum. Mm-hmm. I've seen people live in assisted living up to about $10,000 a month, because what they're really getting at that level, you're really getting skilled nursing type care in an assisted living environment, because you're having somebody come in and check on you 4 or 5 times a day and bring you every single med and make sure you take your meds and make sure all your they'll escort you to and from your meals. Every time you interact in assisted living, every time you interact with a staff member, you should think that's a charge. That's just the harsh reality of it. And I used to have to explain this to people, and I had a gentleman once, he said, so every time I ring that bell, he said, I should think cash register. I told him, I said, if I could make that little button go cha-ching every time you rang it, I would. Because it's true. Every time you interact with a staff member in assisted living, you're going to be paying a price, literally a price. Skilled nursing is done entirely differently, and that's when we get to the pay sources down here. So there are several ways that senior housing is paid for and senior health care is paid for. Medicare is the #1 thing, but Medicare does not pay for housing. It does not pay housing costs. Medicare is for acute instances of illness or injury and for rehab. It will cover some of a rehab stay, usually not 100%. So if you go to a place like a transitional care unit, a TCU, you will you will most likely have Medicare cover some of that. But that's also very prescriptive. Medicare says you have XYZ number of days, and then you got to go home. So.
But it's 100 for the year, 100 days.
Yes, you have 100 days, yes, of TCU stay in a year. So if you have, somebody has the way I see people run out of days is usually with like a cardiac or a neurological event. With a hip replacement or a shoulder replacement, that's things, they've gotten very good at doing those, and the rehab process has gotten pretty good too. But like any kind of medical thing, it depends on how healthy you are going in, how easy it's going to be for you to come back out. So if you were a tennis player and you played 3 times a week and you were really fit and you went and had a knee replacement, you probably wouldn't be in rehab for more than a week or so. And then you go home and you keep doing your exercises and you bounce back. If you're somebody who's not active at all and has, a heart issue and, other types, maybe some chronic illness or something like that, it's probably going to take you a longer time and to get through something like a knee surgery and a knee rehab. Now, somebody who has a cardiac event, after those things, there's a lot of med balancing, and we're going to try out this med, and we're going to try out this med, we're going to try out this med, see if it works. And oftentimes you need to be monitored during that period. So that might be why you would be in a TCU for an extended period of time after a cardiac or a neurological type of event. Things like a heart attack or a stroke. In independent living and assisted living, mostly that's going to be a private pay situation, mostly. Now, the exception to that is somebody who, and Minnesota's nice, we have something called the Elder Waiver here in Minnesota that helps people pay for housing if they qualify for Medicaid. It's essentially Medicaid for assisted living, or medical assistance is what they call it in Minnesota. On the skilled nursing side, it's called medical assistance. And if you qualify for Medicaid, you qualify for this medical assistance, which does help pay for housing. Medicare, federally funded, doesn't pay for housing. Medicaid, medical assistance, state funded, does help pay for housing. And there are waivers on the assisted living side that can help with that. The way to access those things, find a social worker. Call your county, call a social worker. They can help you access those benefits. When those benefits are available to you is when your assets have reached minimum levels, under $10,000. If you still own your home and it's a nice, like around here in this area where these houses were, $40,000 when they were built back in 1950, but now they're, $200,000 houses. If you still have a house, that's considered an asset. It depends on who all's living in the house and how it's being used, but that's why you need a social worker who can really help you figure out the ins and outs of which assets count towards the spend down, which is what they call it. You spend down your assets until you need medical assistance, and then it'll kick in.
Spend down to 10,000?
It's actually 3 on the waiver
3,
program.
but you want to apply.
3,000.
It's 3,000 when it activates. 10,000 is when you want to start the application process. Private insurance, some private insurance have stipulations within them where they'll pay for certain things, especially on the rehab side. Oftentimes, Medicare pays for 80%. Oftentimes, private insurance, supplemental private insurance will pay for the other 20% on things like a rehab stay in a transitional care unit. Not always. Like everything, you have to check your policy and make sure. There are also long-term care insurance policies. They're expensive, but they can help offset the costs of living in assisted living or skilled nursing. And those are dependent on the services that you receive. That's the next section is Minnesota case mix. So in Minnesota, they recognized that not everybody has the exact same needs. So they came up with something called the Minnesota case mix. And what that does is it puts everyone into a different category of need, essentially. So they will take a nurse's assessment. So if you go to a facility, assisted living or skilled nursing, you say, I'm going to move in. They'll say, great. They'll say, you need an assessment. In assisted living, you'll sit down with a registered nurse usually, and they will go through several rubrics, and they'll have a cognitive evaluation. They'll actually, and sometimes surreptitiously, give you a physical evaluation where they'll watch you move. They'll see someone, and it depends on the conditions that somebody's coming in with. If somebody walks in with a tennis racket, they're probably going to say you're fine, but they'll ask you questions and just like about the care that you think you need, and then sometimes they will prescribe other cares that they think you need too. You do not have to purchase any services from anybody. You are never required, and this is something that gets a little dicey because sometimes you hear certain folks say, well, they told me at the hospital that I had to X, Y, Z. You know, they told me at the hospital that I had to do this. It's like, well, that was a recommendation that they gave you. It doesn't mean you have to do that. I mean, the thing is, a social worker at a hospital can say, it's not safe for you to go home. It's not safe for you to be there. I think you should go to this transitional care unit until it's safe for you to go home. And you, as a adult person who makes your own decisions, can say, nope, I'm going home anyway. And they'll say, okay, but they'll document that they gave you the advice to do something that they think was safer. The question is, should you get an independent social worker even if you're getting advice from a social worker that works for a hospital? That's actually a highly regulated, they're licensed personnel, so they're highly regulated. They're not allowed to take gifts from people. They are required to work in the best interest of their patients. They are not allowed to make recommendations to specific agencies with any kind of quid pro quo. That's not allowed. So, and that is a licensed by the state occupation. And if they do something like that, if they start funneling people just to one agency, and it can be kind of shady, and they would get in trouble. And they would probably lose their license. So I don't know that you would necessarily need an independent social worker or a county social worker, because they are regulated the same way in the hospital that they are regulated in the county too.
Okay, so she's not selling for the hospital then?
No.
Not at all.
No.
Okay.
So, and what I always say is, it's a social worker's job to provide you with options. And there should always be options. So if they say, you need home care, and you say, well, who should I get that from? Generally, and this is how I've always addressed that question too, because I've been in that position as a housing coordinator. I had the business I was working for, but I would always give folks options. I would say, I've worked with these 3 agencies. Well, which one is the best? Which one should I use? And that's an awkward place to be, because you don't want to influence somebody. Really, it's up to you who you're going to go with. The way I've always addressed it is, I've worked with this agency a lot, and I've never had a complaint. I've worked with this agency, and several people have liked that one, but this is the one I've worked with the most. But I won't tell you this one's necessarily, I might tell you which one's better than the other one. But that's a personal decision to make. And it's a smart idea to maybe interview with a company first, do a consult with a company, and get a feel for them. Because like I've said about everything, in the facilities or with agencies that are providing, it's the people that you're going to have to get along with. And if it's a home care agency coming into your house, you're going to want to know who those people are who are coming into your house. So it's not a bad idea to interview or to look up reviews online. That's another way to kind of gauge the quality of an agency.
Who provides social workers?
Who provide? The county.
Oh, okay.
Hennepin County has social workers, Ramsey County has social workers, all of them. So also facilities have social workers.
Okay.
So a skilled nursing facility is going to have social workers that work there. Not every assisted living is going to. Most assisted livings won't. You might have somebody who was a social worker who's now a housing coordinator, or something like that. But they're not required in assisted living. Skilled nursing, they're required. And that's so that every patient, every resident has an advocate. But like I said, they are regulated heavily by the state. They're required to go through continuing education, just like other licensed personnel, all required to go through continuing education and keep their licensure up. So, but if you're just a person living out in the world and you need to start accessing any kind of services, you can call your county and get a social worker. Now, that makes you a vulnerable adult. If you are accessing any types of services at all in an assisted living environment, if you're living at home and accessing home care from a home care agency, you're considered a vulnerable adult, and you're protected pretty vociferously by the state of Minnesota. And the federal government. There's a lot of laws regarding vulnerable adults and abuse and things like that, and reporting of abuse. I'm a mandated reporter. If I saw you, say you had a son and he came to pick you up here, and I saw you getting in your car and he was being particularly rough with you, I would have to report that. I would say, I don't know that that person's looking out for the best interest of that person. If you were a person accessing services, especially from my agency, and I saw something like that, I would have to report it, because I would have a suspicion of abuse. So, and that's everybody who works in IO, I would think. Any licensed personnel is going to be a mandated reporter. Any RN or LPN or social worker. Assisted living, yes, they're mandated reporters, and skilled nursing, every staff member, down to the custodial staff, is a mandated reporter. Everybody who works there. As a person in Minnesota who works in a senior housing facility, they're all mandated reporters, social workers included. And there's a phone number that you have to call. So if you see something, you have to call this number and say, I suspect abuse, and give them all that kind of information. We were talking about the case mix, and that's how we got into social workers. So the case mix, essentially, in skilled nursing and assisted living, you're going to pay for the services that you are accessing. But in skilled nursing, it's a daily rate. It's a completely different pay model than assisted living. In assisted living, you rent your apartment and you purchase your services. In skilled nursing, you pay for your room rate, and that covers everything. Now, everyone's room rate is not necessarily going to be the same, because somebody who's living in skilled nursing who can still manage their own eating, who is still ambulatory, can still walk, someone who needs fewer services is going to pay less than somebody who needs more services. Someone who's completely dependent, can't move on their own, can't manage their own eating, can't manage their own toileting, someone who needs those services, they're going to pay more. It's one room rate. So the lowest room rate in Minnesota, the last time I looked, was $187 a day. So that's around that's around $4,200, I think, a month, give or take, 30 to 31 or 28 days. So that's the lowest you would pay. And I've seen folks in memory care who are just not sound decision makers, but they still get around, they're still all of those things. And that's the only way I've ever seen somebody at that lowest rate. The highest rate, I think, is $450 a day. And that's getting into $12,000 a month. And it's not unusual. But there's a list, and it literally is a whole 8.5 by 11 page long list of all of the different case mix rates. So on average, people are in for about $200 to $250 a day in skilled nursing, and that includes TCU stays, transitional care stays. It's around $200 to $250 per day. So you're talking about around $7,000 a month, something like that, for skilled nursing. But that's why things like having a social worker, knowing about medical assistance or Medicaid, knowing about those things is important, because if you go into skilled nursing, your assets are going to dwindle twice as fast as if you're in assisted living. So it's important to know the differences between those things and what's the best care. Assisted living, you can't really expect somebody to be at your beck and call with a call-in. You can and you can't, depending on the facility and their staffing ratios. Sometimes you'll have one aide overnight to 40 or 50 people in assisted living. That's all they're required to have, is a staff member 24 hours a day available to you. Skilled nursing, that's not the case. You're going to have 2 or 3 aides per wing, depending on the place and the quality of the place. And you'll have people, call-out response time in a skilled nursing should be under 10 minutes. Should be. I say that as somebody who's purchased this kind of care for family members too. That's one thing that that's one of my first questions. What's your call-out response time? And they hate it when you ask that, because it's a variable. Some days it's 5 minutes, and then some days it's, longer. But you want those call times to be as fast as possible. Okay, so this is kind of the most important part of the talk, in my opinion. It's the Home Care Bill of Rights is something that no matter where you go, they're going to give to you, and they're going to make you sign something that says you received it in assisted living. But these rights also apply to people in skilled nursing as well. You can access it online And you can find the home care bill of rights on those sources. The home care bill of rights lists everything that you can expect. It doesn't list everything. It lists a lot of things that you can expect to encounter when you're in assisted living. It outlines things like you are allowed to purchase services from any agency. You are not required in assisted living to purchase home care from your assisted living. Now, that assisted living might wrap some home care into their rental rate, or they might say everybody who lives here has to purchase at least the minimum package from us, and that's pretty common in assisted living, but you aren't required to buy home care from an assisted living. As a matter of fact, I've run up against clients who were living in my assisted living when I was a housing coordinator. They're living in my assisted living, and their care needs increased past the capacity of our home care. So what they were needing really was skilled nursing care, but they're still living in assisted living, and they said, well, I don't want to move over to skilled nursing care. I want to stay in assisted living. I want to stay in my apartment. You are perfectly within your rights to do that, but they are perfectly within their rights in that assisted living to say, our home care can't meet your needs, and therefore we're going to discharge you from our home care. You can continue to rent your apartment from us, but you are going to need to have someone come in, and as mandated reporters, you have to have a home care agency come in and provide you the 24-hour care that you need. Because if you say, well, I'm not going to buy home care from you anymore, and you're living in that apartment, you're still a vulnerable adult, and if they see that you can't manage things for yourself, which is why you would be in assisted living anyway, they can report that you are not making sound decisions, and then you get into all kinds of legal mess. Because then there's questions of competence and whether you're about your decision making and things like that. So, but that's one of the things in the home care bill of rights is you have the right to refuse service. And that's the difference. That's another difference between assisted living and skilled nursing. In assisted living, you have a lot more leeway to refuse service than in skilled nursing, because once you're in skilled nursing, things are a lot more prescriptive. So instead of somebody coming and saying, Cassie, it's time to come down to dinner, and you can say, well, I'm not coming down to dinner in the dining room tonight. I'm going to fix my own dinner. Okay. In skilled nursing, you have less latitude in that arena. It's going to be time to go to dinner, and they're going to take you to dinner. So that's kind of one of the differences. That's one of the biggest differences in skilled nursing and assisted living is the right to refuse service. But the home care bill of rights is something that I encourage people to download, print out, and carry with them when you're looking at assisted living facilities. And it's something that they should go over with you upon intake. Oftentimes they're going to sit in front of you and say, this is our handbook. It's got all of these neat things in it, and I need you to sign here that you received our handbook. And you'll sign that thing. And then I've seen a lot of my clients would just take the handbook and throw it away. Well, there's a lot of good information in those handbooks. In those handbooks, you'll have your home care bill of rights and things like that, which really show you more what the agency can and can't do to and for you, and how you're going to interact with your home care agency is regulated by the home care bill of rights. If your rights are being violated, or you suspect someone's rights are being violated, or you just have questions about what's going on, or you think that the agency that you're purchasing services from is not acting in your best interest, you can call the Ombudsman for long-term care here in Minnesota. You can find the Office of the Ombudsman for long-term care in Minnesota. And so like I said at the beginning, things are highly regulated in this state, and this is one of the ways that they really do look out for people. I've actually interacted with the Ombudsman's office. I've had very positive interactions with the person that they sent. Essentially, if you have a dispute with an agency that you're purchasing home care from or any kind of senior services, if you're having a dispute with the agency in some way where they're trying to maybe discharge you when you don't want to be discharged, then you call the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman will come in and arbitrate that situation for you. Similar to a social worker, but the Ombudsman is over all the facilities in Minnesota, all of them. There are limits to aging in place. If somebody really isn't making sound decisions and isn't safe in a specific environment, the facility will consult with you. They're not going to they're not allowed to do something without your permission. Are you your mother's power of attorney?
Yes.
That's very smart. That's another thing to consider before moving into senior housing, is making sure you assign a power of attorney, putting together an advanced healthcare directive, which means also assigning somebody as a healthcare agent for you. That way, if you become incapacitated in any way, even if you just have a loss of consciousness one day, that's not related to a long-term or chronic illness, you'll want somebody in place to help make those decisions for you. So that's an important piece before moving into senior housing, is to get your power of attorney and your healthcare directive put together. So your mom is living, is she independent or assisted right now?
She's independent.
Independent. Is she receiving any services?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of pick and choose.
That's usually how that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But, so here's something that I always used to consult with people about assisted living versus skilled nursing. And it's that balancing point on how much you're paying. So if you're in assisted living, which is a great environment because you have your own apartment, you have your private shower, and you have your private kitchen, and you have all of those things. It's a great environment usually. And that feels very comfortable. And usually people can live there 5. I've seen people live 12 years in an assisted living. Very long time in an assisted living. And they do well. And I've seen people go all the way through end of life in assisted living just because of the way, their life progressed. Now, there's a tipping point where somebody's receiving services, and you're in assisted living. So when you first move in, you're maybe having a couple of meals in the dining room, you're maybe having somebody come and visit you in the morning and in the evening just to make sure you're dressed properly or whatever. So you're just minimal services, like probably what your mom's dealing with now. Mm-hmm. So then she's there for 4 or 5 years. She starts having somebody else manage her medications for her, which is going to get a little bit more expensive. Mm-hmm. And then maybe she's had some wound care or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then that gets more expensive. And then all of a sudden you're living in assisted living, which is your awesome apartment, and you've just been purchasing those services a la carte. And then all of a sudden it looks like you're spending $8,000 or $9,000 a month to be in assisted living. Well, that is a tipping point where it's going to be less expensive for somebody to be in skilled nursing because it's that daily room rate, and possibly all of the services that mom is getting over in independent living or assisted living, they can do over here, but do it for less because it's all included in that daily room rate. So there is a tipping point. And that's when it really just becomes an environmental question. Is mom using her kitchen? Is somebody coming in to assist mom with the shower anyway? How many meals, is she cooking at all? Does she do more than, is she using her living room space? Because that's the other thing too. If somebody's just living in their bedroom with a TV, well, that's essentially what a skilled nursing room is like. And since they're already getting assistance with showers, it's the same thing in skilled nursing. You're going to have assistance with showers. So once again, none of these conversations are easy to have. But it's good to have the knowledge and know kind of what those balanced tipping points are way ahead of time. That way you can keep an eye on those things and help your mom utilize her assets or utilize the services as efficiently and effectively as possible. So if mom is having a lot of falls in assisted living, she might need more eyes on her during the day, and she's going to get that in skilled nursing rather than in assisted living, where she can be behind a closed locked door all day. So it's all about safety and comfort. That's the whole industry, is safety and comfort. Is somebody safe? Are they comfortable? That's what I look for in independent living, assisted living, skilled nursing, memory care. Those are the watchwords right there. Safety and comfort. It's not easy to navigate, and it helps to have someone talk you through certain things, or to have somebody to ask questions of. My business cards are up here. Feel free to take one of my business cards. I know it says hospice on there. It's not all that I do. We work in home health and hospice. So, and if I may, just briefly preach my hospice gospel, since I do work for an agency that serves hospice. Hospice is not for the last 3 days of someone's life. It's for the last 6 months to a year of a person's life. And anybody who has Medicare has a hospice benefit waiting for them at no out-of-pocket expense. That's my elevator speech on hospice. So anybody who accesses Medicare has a hospice benefit waiting for them, and don't wait till it's too late, because talking about comfort again, that's what hospice is. It's comfort care, not just for the last 3 days of someone's life, but it can really improve the last year of someone's life. Hospice isn't necessarily a place, it's a set of services, a lot like memory care. Memory care can be done in different settings, so can hospice. Hospice can come to your home, or hospice can be done in a skilled nursing setting, or in a hospital setting, or in an assisted living setting. So, and what happens when people graduate from hospice, it means that their condition is stabilized, that they're no longer declining. In order for somebody to be on hospice and have it paid for by either a private insurance or Medicare, they have to be in an actual decline. They have to be declining. So, and only a doctor can make that determination. So, but if somebody stabilizes and all of a sudden they're not declining anymore, that's when they would graduate. We call it graduating from hospice. But there's nothing that says that you can't get evaluated a month later and go back on hospice. There are, different regulations on that. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate you coming. John, thank you for reporting. This is going to be on St. Louis ParkTV.